Hi, and welcome to another edition of The Grid. We're in week 3 of the playoffs right now, and I have a couple of co-hosts tonight. On my far right there is Ray Castillo, and right here next to me is Tyre. And before we get into this week's game, we took a pretty big hit last week. And let's start with our local team, Victoria West. They lost a tough one to San Antonio Harlan. Tyler, you covered that game. Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they started out the game pretty well first drive. They drove down the field but missed a field goal. And there was a controversial play on a punt on the ensuing Harlan drive, and Harlan got the ball back at at West's 5-yard line, and they just kind of took over the game from there. The Warriors hadn't faced anyone nearly that explosive. I mean, Miller was the closest thing they came to it, but the offense, Harlan's offense, had an explosive running back, a slot receiver that could burn past people, a quarterback that could run and throw the ball. It was just not something the Warriors could handle.
Yeah, and I guess the silver lining in the cloud there is that Tyvon Hardrick was able to break the city rushing record held by Jamar Gertie.
Yeah, late in the fourth quarter, he was able to break it. I think he finished 4 yards ahead of where Gertie was, so he's now the all-time Victoria leading rusher, and he was sad about everything after the game, but he was excited that he was able to get that accomplishment.
And I guess a big disappointment, obviously you want to keep moving on. They would have played San Antonio Wagner. And the encouraging thing for that is what would have been encouraging is Wagner only defeated Flower Bluff by like 4 points. And everybody thought, Wagner's the team to beat. And from what I understand, that game was supposed to be played here, that they had actually won a flip. But you got to win to move on, and that didn't happen. And unfortunately, it also happened to the Calhoun Sand Crabs, who ran into a very good opponent. It's kind of interesting. I was in Port Lavaca covering El Campo and Beeville, and I was getting updates, of course. Sand Crabs, I think, Ray, you said that Coach Whitaker had told you before the game that Bernie Champion was a very good team. What kind of transpired there?
Yeah, so it was just kind of some uncharted territory for Calhoun. They trailed for the first time in, was it 7-8 weeks? Just a different feeling for them. Bernie Champion came out with their TCU commit quarterback, Luke Boyers, and he just ran it downfield and gave them that early 7-0 lead. Calhoun had to play catch up the rest of the game. They actually did take a 3-point lead at the half, but it was all Bernie Champion in that second half. Calhoun just it was back and forth scoring the first 2 quarters. Johnson had his numbers, but Bernie Champion was just too much offensively.
Yeah, and it's this is one of those disappointing things about the bracket. You have no control over that. Whereas Cal Allen's on the other side of the bracket. Cal Allen still alive, very much so. In fact, looking very, very good right now. Of course, you would think they'd eventually probably end up having to play Bernie Champion, and that could be in the quarterfinals for the right to go to the semifinals.
Yeah, and Coach Whitaker talked about that. He mentioned the bracket and the way the matchups were played out, and he felt like that game against Bernie Champion could easily have been a regional final game, and he said it was just unfortunate they had to meet that early.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, when we talk about the bracket, this is the game that everybody's been waiting for at the beginning of the season. Shiner Refugio finally meeting up, and like you say, the bracket, I mean, this is a game that shouldn't be played in round 3, but it is. So you just have to go out there and do it. They did it last year. Refugio prevailed, a back and forth kind of game. This year, it's you have 2 just very good teams. Refugio last week was tested by Thorndale, and they were tied actually 20-20 at halftime. Came out and outscored them 29-0 in the second half. Shiner, meanwhile, no one's even challenged Shiner, and I mean, when I looked at the schedule, they played some good teams. They beat Industrial, they beat Hallettsville, they beat Lexington, who all three of those teams are still playing. Now, granted, Lexington is not the same team now as they had some ineligible guys when Shiner played them, but still, the Comanches have been very impressive. Of course, Refugio's impressive. This is going to attract a lot of people. Converse Jetson Friday night. There'll be a lot of people there waiting to see this game. Now, a lot of people just think that the winner of this game will go on to state. That's not a given, but there's a good chance. Of course, the winner would play the winner of Holland and the defending state champion Mason. So, that's not a given, but this should be an excellent game. You have two teams, Shiner loaded with speed. You have a state championship, two state championship relay teams on that team. Refugio, of course, a very explosive offense with their quarterback, Austin Ochoa. And just a great game for the area. Like I said, it's just disappointing that it has to be this early because you're going to have next week, you're going to have a really good team sitting at home, but that's just how Texas high school football playoffs work. And while we're talking about that, let's move on. In 4A, we have El Campo, which I saw last week, very impressive against Beeville, just dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. El Campo moves on, and they face Liberty Hill. Now, if anybody knows Liberty Hill, they are a slot T team, and probably one of the best slot T teams in the state. Have been running that offense for years and years. Last year, Liberty Hill went to the state final, lost to Waco La Vega in that game. It was funny, I spoke to Coach Wayne Condra after the game. Beeville runs a slot T too a little bit. And I told him, I said, well, you get to see another slot T team. And he goes, yeah, it's going to be a little different, but it will be the slot T. So that should be a good game with El Campo. I mean, that running back, John Trey Davis, he is just running like crazy. And, of course, you have Charles Shorter. And this week they'll get Reuben Owens back. He missed last game with an injury. So they'll be pretty much at full strength. They're banged up. At this point in the season, pretty much everybody's banged up. So let's move on. Of course, the Class 3A Division I, we have a couple of 14 3A D1 teams playing. We have Hallettsville and Industrial. Hallettsville will be going up against George West. And then we have Industrial playing against Drew Blank here.
Columbus.
Columbus, that's right.
Cardinals.
I should remember the Shobles, of course, in Columbus.
Yeah.
And okay, first, Ray, I don't know if you want to talk
Sure.
about this. You spoke to Tommy Pensick and Jamie Dixon from Industrial about their game. We should mention that Hallettsville did play Columbus in before
Right.
district, and they beat them by like 2 points. So this will be a tough contest. And George West, look at them. They're coached by Brent Cornegay, who was at Yoakum. So they're all familiar with each other, and ought to be a couple of good games.
Yeah, you just look at the one thing that stood out to me when I talked to him was just the differences from last year and this year. Industrial finishing 4th in that district, and then Hallettsville not even making the playoffs.
Right.
And here they are, the top 2 teams in that district, playing for a chance to keep their seasons alive here in the regional round. And Coach Dixon, just the big thing he said was the senior leadership is so much different. He said they got a lot of seniors this year that are really leading the way and telling these guys, how to play the game. And then you just got Hallettsville, Coach Pensick, just impressed with what his team has been able to do with such limited numbers. They've had 21 players, he told me, throughout the season, just not your average size, for your team, and they're able to get it done. And he just says he kept it simple. He said his guys are playing with a lot of heart and determination, and that's really the thing is they're getting along. Their chemistry is great, and as we've seen, it's paid off really well. And these teams, they're not looking ahead. They know there's a chance they could meet again, but they definitely want to take care of the task at hand and worry about that first.
Yeah, and of course, I think we need to mention Jonathan Brooks. He has just been going going off in the playoffs. He had over 300 yards last week in their win, and he's just, he has really become the player, that I think Coach Pensick had hoped he'd become.
Yeah.
He has really stood out this season, especially now, and they're really leaning on him. It's not all they do. They can throw the ball.
Yeah,
In fact, they had a big touchdown pass last week in their game against Jordanton to tie the game at halftime on the last play. So they can do other things, but when you have that threat, that home run threat like they've got with Brooks, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, he's 9 touchdowns so far in the playoffs, 540 yards rushing in just 2 games. So and you mentioned it, Mike. They can pass. Lane Linhart's shown all year that he can throw the ball, and he can play with these guys, and hopefully they can continue that.
And also, I think we should mention Karsten Wimberly from Industrial. He's an outstanding athlete. A lot of coaches have talked to me about him. He runs that offense, and they do run the slot tee, but they're also getting the shotgun too. So he can do a lot of things with that offense. So he's been a big plus too. And let's move on to 3A Division II. We have the Ganado Indians, who are in our area actually the last team standing in that division. They have the Poth Pirates, always a good, solid team. And, Ganado worked a little magic last week.
They did. They scored with about 1:40 left, I think, and then London came right back and scored within 10 seconds, I think, of them scoring. But then they went into their 2-minute offense, and I was talking to Coach Bennett earlier this week, and it's something they practice every day with their 2-minute offense, and they ran it to perfection and got a touchdown with 8 seconds left in the game.
Yeah, and he's done really a great job with that team because, he had a freshman quarterback, and he's really kind of I think he's kind of grown that team, He's just they've improved as the year has gone on, which is what you want to do. And, he's put them in a position, to make a run.
Absolutely. He was talking earlier about how much this group has bought in, and that's been the biggest reason for their success, is that they have bought in, and they do have, young quarterback. They have some young position players all around, really, but they've been able to step up and keep it in it. And I think this week the biggest thing for them will just be getting that consistency out of those positions, because I know that their quarterback had 2 interceptions early in the first half there last week, and Bennett was emphasizing that can't happen against a team like Poth.
Yeah, you can't have a pick 6 especially, but if they can somehow pull out a win, there's a good chance they'd face East Bernard in the quarterfinals, their district foe. So that'll be interesting to see what will happen there. And we've already mentioned, of course, Shiner and Refugio, but we do have some 2A Division 2 teams. Falls City and Flatonia both still very much alive. Boy, Brady Lissy for Falls City, he has just been going off. He has had a tremendous year, and I can't say enough about him because he started the year at quarterback, and because they needed him there. And fortunately, they were able to find Jackson Pipes, who has come along and thrown very well, and that allowed Brady to move back to running back. And he's really put on a performance. And, of course, the thing that shouldn't go unmentioned is their offensive and defensive line. Falls City has a tremendous front, very big front. So, and then Flatonia, the job that Chris Freitag's done up there, they're 11-1 as well, and they face Bremond, which would be a tough task. Bremond is a perennial playoff team, but if those 2 teams can win, they would play each other for a chance to go to the semifinals. So that should be a good matchup. And of course, we got to mention our 2 private schools who will be in the semifinals: Shiner St. Paul and Hallettsville Sacred Heart. Shiner St. Paul, of course, is the defending state champion. They play Fort Worth Lake Country Christian, And Sacred Heart will play Sacred Heart from Munster, which is way up north, in case you're not sure where that is. The winners of these two games play for state next week. So there's a possibility of that Lavaca County showdown again in the state final if they can both pull it off.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we do have a six-man team in the state final this week up in Bryan.
Cool.
The Victoria Cobra Athletics, trying to win a state title this week. They'll be playing a homeschool team from up in the Bryan College Station area, and that'll be up at noon on Saturday up in Bryan. So we have we have some teams that are hanging around. I mean, let's face it, we'll know we have at least one team next week, but obviously we're hoping for more, that more teams have success. And, after you eat your Thanksgiving turkey on Thursday, get ready for high school football, playoff football on Friday. We'll keep you up with all the games in our area. And you can follow us, of course, on Twitter, on Advo Sports, and read about it in the e-edition and, of course, in the grid on Sunday. And, of course, we're hoping we're back with a bunch of teams, or as many as we have next week on the grid.